She pulled the gold band off her swollen finger and held it out to the trapper in the doorway. Snow blew sideways past her face. She was 7 months along and 4 miles above the timberline. She said one night out of the wind, the ring for the roof. He looked at the band. He looked at her belly. He did not take the ring. He stepped back and held the door. She walked in and sat down by the stove. He picked up the ring from his table. He turned it once. He read the inscription on the inside curve. His hand started to shake. He knew that ring. He had buried that ring 11 years ago in a closed casket far below this mountain. Who was the man who had given it to her? How was he alive in this world? And what was she carrying? Chapter 2. Her name was Esther Lyle. She was 27 years old. She came up the Bitterroot Range on foot from a stage stop. She had been turned out of 3 days earlier. The wagon master would not carry a widow that far gone. He said it was bad luck. He said a baby born on his run was a baby he would have to bury. He gave her a sack of biscuits and pointed at the mountain. He said there was a trapper up there who took winter boarders sometimes. He said the trapper did not turn women away. He did not say the trapper had not seen a woman in 7 years. He did not say the trapper kept a loaded pistol on a peg by his door. The year was 1894. The storm had come in 2 days early. She walked through it because she had no choice. Her husband had been dead 9 months. The land was gone. The note on the land was gone. The wedding ring on her finger was the only thing in the world that still belonged to her, and she was ready to give it up for a stove and a wall. The trapper's name was Silas Renner. He was 34. He had been on that ridge 11 winters. He was a quiet man with a long jaw and brown hair gone gray at the temples. He trapped marten and lynx and beaver. He sold his pelts twice a year at a post 16 miles down the South Fork. He did not drink. He did not keep a dog. He read the Bible at night by a single tallow candle. He kept a Colt Navy pistol oiled and loaded on a peg by the door. He had come up that mountain to disappear. He had almost managed it. The cabin was 12 by 14 feet. 1 window. 1 stove. 1 bunk on the back wall. A loft over the door he used for stores. 3 traps hung on the south wall. A rifle rack with 2 rifles. A wash basin. A small writing desk under the window with a tin of ink and a stack of paper bound in string. He had not expected company. He had not laid in food for 2. He had not laid in firewood for 2. He stood with her wedding ring in his hand. He listened to the wind hit the chinking. He did the arithmetic. He could feed her until spring. Barely. He could not turn her back out into the storm. The storm would last 6 days, and the next storm was already on the wire from the post. He set the ring on the writing desk. He did not look at her. He said he would not take her ring. He said she could stay the winter. He said there were rules, and he would tell her the rules in the morning. She started to cry. She did not make a sound. The tears just ran. She said her husband's name was Caleb Lyle. She said he had died in a flood on the Missouri River the previous August. She said the ring was the only thing of his she had left. She said, "Please keep it safe." Silas Renner did not answer her. He went to the stove and put on a kettle. He cut bread. He set a tin plate on the table beside her. He told her to eat. He told her the loft was hers for the night, and he would sleep by the stove. He climbed the ladder and brought down a wool blanket and a feather tick he had been saving for a trade. He laid them in the loft. He did not look at the ring again. He could not look at the ring again. He sat by the stove and listened to her chew the bread slowly the way a woman chews when she has not eaten in 2 days and is afraid she will be sick if she eats too fast. He looked at the wall and nodded her. He waited until she climbed into the loft. He waited until her breathing slowed. Then he picked up the ring from the desk and he held it to the candle. He had a feeling in his chest he had not had in 11 years. It was not anger. It was a cold, open hole. He had to sit down. He had to set the ring down before he dropped it. He set it on the desk in the small ring of candlelight, and he stared at it like it was something that had crawled out of the floor at him. The wind hit the cabin from the north. The loft creaked above him. A woman he did not know was asleep in his house, and on her finger was a ring he had paid for in 1881. Chapter 3. The inscription on the inside of the band was 4 words and a date. To my Anna forever. June 11, 1881. Anna Renner had been 17 years old in June of 1881. She was Silas Renner's younger sister. She had married a riverboat clerk in St. Louis that summer. The clerk had told her father he was 24 and from a good Pennsylvania family. He was 31 and from nowhere. He had killed Anna with a coal hatchet in the kitchen of their rented rooms on the 8th of September 1883. He had taken her ring off her finger and he had run. The St. Louis police had found his coat in a slough below the levee and his hat downstream the next morning. They told the family he had drowned trying to cross to the Illinois side. They closed the case. They gave the family a sealed casket. They buried Anna and the empty story together in Bellefontaine Cemetery. Silas had stood at that grave at the age of 23. He had sworn over his sister's casket that if the river had not killed Caleb Beggs, then he would. He had hunted the man for 2 years across 4 states. He had lost the trail in Omaha. He had come west. He had built the cabin. He had told himself the man was dead. He sat at the writing desk that first night with the ring under the candle. He turned it and turned it. The engraving was his own work. He had paid the jeweler on Olive Street $4 to let him cut it himself. He remembered the burr of the steel. He remembered Anna laughing at him for taking so long. He could not be mistaken. The ring upstairs in his loft was on a woman who was carrying Caleb Beggs's child. Caleb Beggs had taken a new name and a new wife and a new life. Somewhere in the last decade, he had given Anna's stolen ring to that new wife. Then he had drowned a second time, or so this widow believed. Silas Renner did not believe it. A man who fakes his death once will fake it twice. He did not sleep. He listened to her breathe in the loft above him. He listened to the small kicking sounds the baby made, and the small sound she made answering it in her sleep. He thought about the pistol on the peg by the door. He thought about how easy it would be. The storm would cover everything. The bear would do the rest by April. No one knew she was up here. The wagon master would not ask. The post would not ask. She had walked out of the world to get here. He could not do it. He knew that by the time the candle was half gone. The child was not its father. The woman was not its father. She had walked 4 miles in a blizzard and offered him the only thing she owned for a roof. She did not know whose ring was on her hand. She did not know what her husband had done in a kitchen in St. Louis. She did not know that the man who had taken her in was the man who had been waiting 11 years to find her husband. None of it was her fault. None of it was the baby's fault. So he made a different plan. He would say nothing. He would feed her through the winter. He would keep her warm and keep the baby alive. In the spring, when the South Fork thawed, he would take her down the mountain. He would put her on a wagon east. He would ride alone to the federal marshal at Missoula. He would say the name. Caleb Beggs alias Caleb Lyle. He would say where the man had last been seen. He would say what the man had done in 1883. He would let the law take it from there. He would not tell the widow. He would not put it on her. She would learn from a newspaper a year from now in a town he would never see. She would understand or she would not. The child would never know its father's real name. That much he could give it. He closed the ring in his fist. He put out the candle. He sat in the dark and he listened to her breathe. The storm broke on the 6th day. The sun came up white and hard over the saddle. The snow on the meadow was 4 feet deep and crusted. Silas went out at dawn with snowshoes and a shovel. He dug out the woodpile. He dug out the privy. He dug a trench to the spring and broke the ice on it. The air was so cold, the inside of his nose stung. He worked until noon. He came back in, and Esther had bread on the table and coffee on the stove. She had patched the elbow of his second coat. She did not speak. She watched him eat. She poured him more coffee. She sat down across from him. She said thank you. She said she would earn her keep. She said she could cook and mend, and read aloud at night if he wanted. She said she had been a schoolteacher in Illinois before she married. She said her baby was a boy. She knew it was a boy. She said she would name him after his father. Caleb. Silas Renner set down his cup. He looked at her across the table. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said that was a fine name. He said his own father had been named Caleb. That was true. His father had been Caleb Renner of Lancaster County. The lie of omission tasted like a copper penny on his tongue. He drank his coffee. He told her the rules. He said she was not to go past the spring alone. He said she was not to touch the rifles. He said the cellar door under the bunk was his and was to stay shut. He said when her time came, he would ride for the midwife at the post if the snow let him, and if it did not, he would do what he could himself. He had pulled enough calves and foals. A baby could not be harder. She almost laughed. She almost cried. She thanked him again. Chapter 4. The thaw she promised herself was months away. The false ease of those first clear days lasted exactly 4. On the 5th day, the wind came back out of the north, and the temperature dropped 30 degrees by sundown, and Esther began to bleed. It was not much blood. It was enough. She told him at the table over the evening meal in a flat voice that did not match her face. She said it had started that afternoon. She said her own mother had lost a baby at 6 months and had bled like this for 2 weeks before the child came too early and died. She said she did not want to die up here. She said she was afraid. She put her hands flat on the table and she waited. Silas Renner stood up. He went to the writing desk. He took down a small ledger he kept for his pelt counts. He turned it over to a blank page and he sat across from her, and he wrote down everything she could tell him. When had she last felt the baby move? How often? How strong? Was the blood bright or dark? Was there pain? Where was the pain? He had no medical training. He had a memory for detail, and he had a clear sense that if he was going to keep her alive, he had to know what he was looking at. She answered every question. The baby was still moving. The blood was dark. The pain was low and dull and not sharp. He nodded. He said he had seen a mare bleed like that once and carry the foal to term. He said it might mean nothing. He said they would watch. If you have come this far with me, hit that subscribe button. The next part of this story is the part that matters. I want you here for it. He moved her bunk closer to the stove that night. He took her place on the floor without being asked. He kept the fire high. He set a kettle of clean water on the stove and a stack of clean rags on the chair beside the bunk, and he sat up in his coat by the door with the lamp turned low. He watched her sleep. He watched her wake every 2 hours and check herself in the privacy he gave her by turning his back. The bleeding slowed by morning. It did not stop. It went on for 9 days. On the 3rd day of it, she asked him to read aloud to her because she could not concentrate to do it herself. He picked up the Bible because it was the closest. He read from the book of Ruth. He read the part where Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go." He read it in his flat, slow voice, and he did not look up at her face until he was done. When he looked up, her eyes were closed, and her hand was on her belly, and she was asleep with tears on her cheeks. He set the book down. He pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. He went back to his chair by the door. The bleeding stopped on the 10th day. The baby kicked harder than ever the morning after. She wept at the breakfast table with relief. She apologized for the tears. He told her she did not have to apologize for anything in this cabin. He meant it. He also knew that what he had said cost him something. He had stopped seeing her as Caleb Beggs's widow on the second day of her bleeding. He had started seeing her as Esther. He did not know what to do with that. The plan in his head still ended with a marshal in Missoula and a wagon east. The plan in his head did not account for what it would feel like to sit by a stove for 9 days and read the book of Ruth to a woman who might bleed to death in front of him. December went black and silent after that. The thermometer he kept nailed by the door read 40 below for 9 straight nights. The cabin walls cracked with the cold. The window iced over so thick from the inside that Esther scraped it with a butter knife to see daylight. She grew bigger. She grew slower. She read aloud in the evenings from the only 3 books in the cabin. The Bible, a copy of Walden, a water-stained almanac from 1889. She read well. Her voice was low and even, and it filled the small room without effort. Sela's mended traps by candlelight and listened, and tried not to look at the ring she had put back on her finger. He had decided he would let her wear it until the boy came. He had decided he could afford that much. The wolves came back to the meadow in the 3rd week of December. They had not been on this ridge in 2 winters. Silas heard them at the spring on a Tuesday night and counted 6 voices. He went out the next morning and read their tracks at the salt block and found one set the size of his open hand. He came back inside and closed the door and threw the bolt, and he did not tell her how big the lead male was. He told her to bar the door if he was out past dark. He told her how to load the second rifle and where the cartridges were. He told her not to fire it unless something was already coming through the door. She listened. She did not argue. She had stopped asking him to explain things. She had started trusting him in small ways, and he had started, against every plan he had made by the candle that first night, trusting her back. Chapter 5. She talked about Caleb sometimes. She talked about how they had met at a church social in Quincy in the spring of 1892. She talked about how he had been kind to her widowed mother. She talked about how he had bought her the ring with money from a riverboat job he never explained. She talked about the flood, the high water on the Missouri in August of the previous year, the skiff that had turned over, the body they never found, the funeral with no body, the land sold to cover his debts that turned out to be larger than anyone had known. Silas listened and nodded and put another stitch in the trap chain and said nothing. Every word she said about her dead husband was a confirmation. The man had not drowned. The man had run again. The man was somewhere south of here, under a 3rd name, watching the papers for word of his widow. There was a night in January when she asked Silas about his own people. He did not want to answer. He answered anyway because she was carrying a child in his bunk, and the candle was low, and he owed her something true. He told her about Lancaster County and the frame house and the orchard. He told her about a mother who had died young and a father who had not been the same after. He told her he had a sister once. He stopped there. He could not say her name. Esther did not push him. She put her hand on his hand on the table, and she said she was sorry. She did not know what she was apologizing for. He let her keep her hand there for a count of 10, and then he stood up and went outside to split kindling he did not need. He stood in the moon and the cold for half an hour. When he came back and she was asleep in the bunk, and the boy was kicking in her belly under the quilt, and Silas Renner stood looking at her, and he understood for the first time that the plan in his head was not going to survive the spring. The baby came on the 2nd of February. The storm had been on them 4 days, and the snow was past the cabin window. Silas could not ride for the midwife, and they both knew it before her water broke. He boiled every pot he owned. He laid out clean rags. He read aloud the page from the almanac about confinement, because she asked him to, and her voice was shaking. The labor went 11 hours. Near the end, she gripped his wrist so hard the bruises stayed for a week. She called him Caleb once. She did not know she had said it. He did not correct her. The boy came out blue and small and silent. Silas cleared his mouth with his little finger. He held him upside down by the ankles the way he had seen a Crow midwife do it once at a trade fair. The boy coughed and started to scream. Silas Renner cried for the first time in 11 years. He cut the cord with his trapping knife. He wrapped the baby in a flannel shirt of his own. He laid him on Esther's chest. He sat down on the floor by the bunk, and he put his face in his hands. She named the boy Caleb Silas Lyle. She asked his permission for the middle name. He gave it. He could not refuse her anything that night. He sat up with the baby for the next 3 nights while she slept. He walked the floor with the small, warm weight on his shoulder. He hummed a hymn his mother had hummed to Anna, and to him in a frame house in Lancaster County 30 years before. He thought about his plan. He thought about the marshal at Missoula. He thought about a wagon east in May. He thought about a newspaper in a town he would never see. He looked down at the baby, and the baby looked up at him with the dark, serious eyes of a 4-day-old child. Silas Renner understood that he could not do it. He could not send the boy's mother east not knowing. He could not let the boy grow up reading his father's name in a court column. He could not let a stranger tell her. It had to be him. It had to be in this cabin. It had to be before the thaw. He waited 2 weeks. He waited until she was strong enough to sit up at the table and nurse the boy through a full meal. He waited for an evening when the wind was down, and the stove was warm, and the boy was asleep in the cradle he had built out of a split crate. Then he took the ring out of his coat pocket, where he had carried it for 4 months. He set it on the table between them. He said he had something to tell her about that ring. He said it would be the hardest thing she had ever heard. He said she could throw him out into the snow when he was done, and he would understand. He said she should sit down. She was already sitting. She set down her cup. She put her hand over the cradle. She said, "Go ahead." He told her. He told her about Anna. He told her about the kitchen incense. Louis on the 8th of September 1883. He told her about the coal hatchet, and the missing ring, and the coat in the slough, and the closed casket in Bellefontaine. He told her about Olive Street, and the $4 engraving and the burr of the steel. He told her about Omaha, and the lost trail and 11 winters on this ridge. He showed her the inscription on the inside of her band. He said the words out loud. "To my Anna forever." June 11, 1881. He said her husband's real name. Caleb Beggs. He said he was sorry. He said he had known since the first night. He said he had not had the courage to tell her until the boy was strong enough to hear his mother cry. Chapter 6. Esther Lyle did not cry. She sat at the table for a long time with her hand on the cradle. She looked at the ring. She looked at Silas Renner. She did not say a word. The stove ticked. The baby breathed. Outside, a single owl called once from the spruce above the spring. After a while, she got up. She walked to the window. She scraped a clear spot in the ice with her thumbnail and looked out at the white meadow under the moon. She stood there 10 minutes. Then she came back. She sat down. She picked up the ring. She held it in her palm. She said she had wondered. She said she had wondered for 2 years. She said there had been a night in Quincy when Caleb had come home from a trip to St. Joseph with blood on his shirt cuff, and he had told her it was a chicken, and she had not believed him and she had not asked. She said there had been a man at a hotel in Hannibal who had called her husband by a different name in the lobby, and Caleb had laughed it off and changed the subject, and she had not asked. She said women learned not to ask. She said she was sorry she had not asked. She said she did not think he had drowned in the Missouri. She said she had not let herself think it. She said the body was never found and the debts were too neat, and the land was too quickly sold, and someone had been to the bank in Quincy 2 days before the flood asking about transfers in her name. She said she had buried a coffin with rocks in it, and she had known it had rocks in it. She had taken the train west because she could not stay in a town where everyone whispered about whether her husband was really dead. She said she had been walking up this mountain to die. She said she had not known she was walking up this mountain to learn the truth. She gave him back the ring. She said it belonged to Anna. She said it had never been hers. She said she did not want it on her hand another night. She said when the boy was old enough she would tell him his father's real name and what his father had done, and the boy could decide for himself what to do with the knowledge. She said she would not lie to her son. She said she was tired of other people's lies. Silas Renner asked her what she wanted him to do about Caleb Beggs. She thought about it for a long time. She said she wanted him to ride to Missoula in the spring and give the marshal the name and the dates and the last known town. She said she would write out everything she knew in her own hand and sign it, and he could carry it down with him. She said she would not go with him. She said she would stay in the cabin with the boy until he came back. She said she did not want her son to grow up knowing his mother had hunted his father. She said she wanted him to grow up knowing his mother had told the truth one time, and then lived a long, quiet life and raised him well. The thaw came late that year. Silas Renner rode down the South Fork on the 20th of April, with Esther's letter folded in oilcloth inside his coat, and Anna's ring in a small leather pouch around his neck. He was gone 9 days. He came back in the first week of May with 2 federal deputies and a paper warrant for a man named Caleb Beggs alias Caleb Lyle alias 3 other names, last seen in Cape Girardeau living as a riverboat purser under the name Caleb Whitcomb. The deputies rode south the next morning. They caught him in Cairo, Illinois in the 2nd week of June. He was hanged in St. Louis in the spring of 1896 for the murder of Anna Renner. The ring was returned to the family. It was buried with Silas's mother in Lancaster County in 1901. Esther Lyle never went back east. She stayed in the cabin on the Bitterroot Range. She married Silas Renner in the summer of 1897 at the church in Hamilton, with no one in the pews but the preacher's wife and the boy in her arms. They had 2 more children, a girl in 1899 and a boy in 1902. They added a 2nd room to the cabin and then a 3rd. They put in a glass window that did not ice over from the inside. They kept 3 milk cows and a small flock of sheep, and Silas gave up his trap lines in 1904 because he did not need them and because Esther asked him to. The boy Caleb Silas grew up calling Silas his father. He was told the other name when he was 16 by his mother in her own words, the way she had promised. He chose to keep the name Lyle. He became a country doctor in Hamilton, Montana. He delivered 300 babies in his career, and he buried both his parents from the same small church where they had married. He outlived them by 40 years. He never met the man who had given him half his blood, and he said until the day he died that he had been raised by the only father he had ever needed.